Welcome to this webinar, which we've titled Managing Sudden Change in Your Career Journey. And kind of do a quick introduction. I don't want to spend very much on this. This is me, married to Kumbi. Kumbi's on the call today. I have three kids by birth and one child by marriage. So my daughter in love is there, Funsho. I work for Process and Naspers. I love the world, and I've traveled the world. I think I'm at 49 countries that I've traveled to now. And I'm also a writer, so I've written some books, and I will talk potentially more about my last book and the book in the making. And actually, for those of you who are part of this session, you're actually part of the development of a book that I'm actually working on called Managing Sudden Change in Your Career Development. So, in your career journey, sorry. So let me kind of show you the agenda of what we're going to follow today. So I'm going to do an introduction about what do we mean by sudden change. I'm going to share some lessons from my life. I'm going to share some lessons from the life of Joseph. And then maybe the most important bit of today is the 7 keys to thriving in sudden change. I'll do some conclusions and then we'll go to Q&A. So that's kind of the plan. And like I said, we're probably going to run for like an hour, 15 minutes. I think I have a content for about 40 minutes and then I will stop and then we would go to Q&A if there are any questions or just general chat. And then that would be the end of the session. So we're gonna crack on and keep going. And I think, Kumbi, if you don't mind, just keeping an eye on the chat for me so I can just focus on presenting. So here we go. So welcome again to this event. And I thought before we just jump in and dive into the actual topic, let's all kind of stop and agree on a definition of sudden, right? So the whole seminar today is really not just talking about change, but sudden change that could happen very quickly, unexpectedly, without warning or prior indication. It just happens and it's sudden, it's a change that happens and you now have to adjust. I'll use some examples later to kind of help define that and tell some stories. And then we'll kind of just dive into the content as we go along. But I want to kind of use the first few minutes to kind of set the scene so we all kind of feel that we're talking about the same thing. So when you think about sudden change, we're thinking about a change that happens in a career specifically here, and it could be significant. It could be an unexpected shift. It could be something that actually changes your employment trajectory. It could change your role. It could change your industry. It could even change your overall career path. And in some cases, you might have to relocate. And so when we talk about sudden change, these are the kind of changes that we're talking about today. And I'm sure many of you have stories along the same lines. You know, these changes can be prompted by a variety of factors. You know, sudden layoffs, which, you know, is in the news every day, termination, changing personal circumstances, changing priorities, or, you know, maybe just a desire for a new challenge or an opportunity, or you want to shift your industry that you're working in. And it could happen very suddenly because you realize that the window is closing and you therefore kind of make that change or you adjust to the change. Sudden change, really, I mean, I think that's why most of us are on the call today, is because we know that it could both be challenging and it can be exciting. Like it could be both things. It could be both together and it could be both joint. But actually, when you really think about it, any change in life requires adaptation, requires you to maybe learn a new skill, maybe change your job function, maybe even start over again, like I've had to do a few times in my career. And sudden change is exactly what it is, sudden. And so you have to be very agile in the way you kind of react to the sudden change. And no matter how you look at it, this is my view, and I think everybody might have a different view. My view is that no matter how you look at it, sudden change can bring unexpected growth, can also bring challenge. I talked to a friend of mine recently who's down in South Africa, and I said, when your sudden change happened to you, how did you feel? And her response was actually that it took a year of counseling to really make her adjust to where she is now. So actually, sudden change, as much as it could create unexpected growth, it could also create unexpected challenge, depending on how that sudden change happens. And actually, you know, it is personal, no matter how you look at it. Sudden change can be very personal. And today we're going to try and unpack some of that as we go through this. So I just thought, let me just do some broad brush examples of sudden change. And COVID was a great example of a sudden change. Like, it hit the whole world at different times, but eventually hit the whole world. And there's a great story about the NBA. And if any of you are fans of the NBA, in a book called The Winning, and in the book, Tim writes in the book, and he talks about the fact that a lot of players, their whole career changed because they'd only played in one way. They'd played in front of an audience. They didn't know how to play another way. The best way they could play was in front of an audience. And all of a sudden, they're playing to empty stadiums. And some people's careers actually tanked because of this sudden change. Some of them, you know, developed and grew better, and some of them actually tanked. And Tim in the book talks about how sudden change can sometimes actually totally change your whole perception around how you do whatever you want to do, because now you're doing it with an audience. And many of us also would know that depending on your home situation, working from home might have been the best thing. A challenge for the whole world that almost tanked the economy in different countries. So I think there is a concept around large sudden change that I'm trying to just kind of walk through. So for example, a CEO of an organization could just exit for whatever reason, personal, death, pushed out, and that brings a whole change to strategy. But it's sudden. All of a sudden, what we were doing yesterday is not what we're doing tomorrow, because there's been a change at the top. If you're a startup, and I'm working with a lot of startups around the world right now, if you run out of funding, there's a sudden change. All of a sudden, we don't have money to do business anymore. Or if, for example, you have a product and it's not selling in the market, and then suddenly you want to change that product, and it sometimes needs to be a rapid change. These are examples of large-scale sudden changes. But you could also have sudden change that is personal. You get promoted unexpectedly. You get demoted unexpectedly. You get made redundant, or your boss exits. You know, CEO exits, or your boss exits. Or maybe your department changes its vision or its mission, or you're told that you need to relocate, you need to change offices because your country office is closing down. So that kind of becomes a personal, individual. It might come from other external sources, but it is very personal. But even more personal could be things that are not related to work. So for example, you might acquire a new dependency. And I use that broad term because it might be that you have a child, or you adopt a child, or you have a pet, or you have an elderly individual that now has to depend on you. Or like me and my wife will be very soon, you become empty nesters. It's a change. And now you might say it's not sudden, but actually when it happens, it does feel sudden. Or your adoption comes through all of a sudden because you've been waiting and waiting, and all of a sudden you now can adopt the child you were waiting to adopt. Or your spouse needs to relocate and you agree that that's what needs to happen. Or you have a relationship change. Or unfortunately, you might have a loss of a very close family member that could change everything for you. So I just want to take a few minutes, and I'm not going to drain this out too much, to look at lessons from my own story, which hopefully you can relate with. And then that will lead us into looking at the life of Joseph, and then we'll look at the key principles. So one example of a sudden change in my life was very early on in my career. In fact, I just graduated. My spouse, who is now my wife, moved abroad. And I came to the UK. I went to the UK. And when I got to the UK, the career I had studied for, I studied civil engineering, they were not hiring in that space. And so all of a sudden, I had to make a very quick career change, like in days. I had to decide that, okay, I can't do civil engineering because there's no job, but I have to work. And so I actually had to create a whole new career path for myself. So that was a change. My spouse moved, I followed her. The impact was I had to change my job. And the result was, I charted a new pathway. And actually I am doing part of what I'm doing today is because of this key starting point in my own history where a change happened. That's one example. Another example is, I was working in a particular job, and one day I was actually working security. And one day I was tapped on the shoulder and I was told, you're going to be reassigned. You have to leave site because we don't think your color fits. And at that point in time, I don't know how to explain it, but you're tapped on the shoulder and said, your job is over. And what I had to do at that time was I went back to the head office and I spoke with my mentor, my job mentor at the time. And she just kind of put boldness into me, encouraged me to go and look for another job, look for better pay, kind of, you're better than this. And she kind of, to all intents and purposes, pushed me out and said, it wasn't immediate, but it was kind of like, you need to just not let this get you down. You need to push forward and kind of progress forward. And so again, that's just an example. And again, you can see the power of having a mentor coach in your life. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a second. What about this? So a company I worked for started outsourcing. So I was a programmer at one point in my life, and I discovered that everything to do with programming was being outsourced to India. And it was happening very quickly and very suddenly. And so I had to redefine my career, moved into business analysis and then into project management. But again, a peer coach or a peer mentor kind of helped me see what was ahead of me and say, hey, you need to do something now to grow your confidence. And actually, out of this experience, I then began to mentor other people. And actually, my whole process of mentoring, I could say, started because somebody mentored and coached me individually on a personal level that really impacted my journey. And it was because they could see on my behalf what was ahead of me. And therefore, by looking through their glasses, I could see what was ahead of me. What about this? I was working on a big project in Manchester when I was working for one of the consultancy firms. And one day I was called into a meeting and basically fired on the spot, like literally leave the project now. We just don't want you anymore. And, they were trying to throw other people under the bus. So I had to control myself and walked off site and made sure I protected the team. But actually what then happened was, because of my resilience, 2 days later, I was recalled to the project. I was apologized to, and that was one of the conditions of me coming back. And also began to give me a bit of autonomy in the organization because they realized that they were wrong. And actually, I ended up not fully going back to the project. I only helped them to transition, but I never went fully back to the project. But that's one example of sudden change that could really mess you up, because you're basically, the people you're working for just say to you, you're done. And I know it's consulting, so my job wasn't at risk, but my project was at risk. And there again, you could see that using resilience was key for me there. Another example in my own life, and don't worry, there's just two more, and then we'll move on to Joseph. My line manager called me into the room one day and said, I'm leaving tomorrow. But the job I'm doing, I've told my boss that you should take it over. So in literally minutes, I was double promoted. And then I had to take a role overseas. So I went to work in Philadelphia because that's where the job was. And actually, because of this pivot in my career, this was kind of what took me into 10 years of consulting and really led to my self-discovery of who I really am. Another example, in a consultancy company I was working in, I resigned and my notice period was cut short to 2 months. So suddenly I was now kind of at a loose end. And this is one of the, sudden changes in my life that I'm not really proud of, in that I became very defensive and combative. And it took the chairman of the UK board to tell me that, Shola, just chill. Like, they're asking you to leave. see it more as a positive thing rather than a negative thing. And it changed my perspective. And actually, the results was that I got a deeper bond with my mentor. It also showed me the power of networks. Was actually when I now walked out of the job a month later, one of the people in my network called me and said, "Hey, would you like to come and work with us?" And literally 3 days later, I was working in another company. And it also led and has led to many exciting opportunities. I don't think I would have been where I am today without this experience. So it was a negative experience, it was a negative sudden change, but actually has led to a very, very fruitful career for me. And then maybe the last one, which is kind of very, very personal. After our first child, we lost a baby. And I remember going into the office, I don't know whether it was the next day or 2 days later, my boss was very unsympathetic and made a statement like along the lines of, people lose babies all the time and, you just need to get back to work. And I walked away from his office, and then the impact that it had on me, or the results that came out of that, was I realized actually I need to prioritize my family because no one else is going to do that for me. And actually, I then became a balance and an advocate for, having a better balance at work, and also influenced me to be able to mentor people so that when they go through similar things, they have an out. Because, the biggest thing that happened to me there was that I had an unsympathetic boss, I had an unsympathetic boss's boss. And basically, I just found myself grieving, but having to still do my deadlines and deliver on my projects. So let's take a minute to look at the life of Joseph. And don't worry, we're not going to take the whole story. But, if you're really interested, the story of Joseph can be found in the Christian Bible from Genesis chapter 37 to 50. And Joseph is a very interesting person. Maybe just a little bit of context. He was born as one of 12 sons, and eventually he got sold into slavery. I'll talk about that in a second. And this is kind of like a quick recap on Joseph's life. Joseph, at a very young age, had a dream that his brothers and his parents were bowing down to him. Out of spite, his brothers sold him into slavery. He was bought by his master, and then he became the leader of his master's house. His master's wife liked him so much and tried to sleep with him, and then claimed that he tried to rape her. He then finds himself going to prison, and in prison, he interprets a dream that ends up making him, I like to say it like this. He became the prime minister of Egypt, but actually in my mind, he became the CEO of one of the first emerging companies in the world. So anybody who's a startup CEO has nothing on Joseph. And let me kind of put that into perspective. Genesis 41, 14 to 14, the story unfolds where he's called out of prison to interpret the dream. He interprets the dream, and then on the spot, he becomes the prime minister. From prison to palace, he becomes the prime minister literally in minutes, right? He goes from, this guy was a prisoner, put in prison because he tried to rape his boss's wife, to you are now in charge of the whole of Egypt. And he was given the signet ring of Pharaoh, and he became the master, if you like, of Egypt. Crazy, right? And I used to call Joseph, I like to call Joseph the disruptor. And I say this because, and I think if you think about sudden change in your own life, there are certain things you're going to have to do when sudden change happens, and that's what Joseph did. And I say in the first 7 years of Joseph's life, and if you don't know the story, what happened was that he predicted that 7 years there's going to be plenty, and then 7 years there's going to be a famine. And so basically, Joseph, as a disruptor, as the new prime minister, had to come up with ideas of how to store food for 14 years. No one has ever done that before. He had to find architects and builders to build stores to keep this food. He had to come up with how to manage the inventory. He had to have facility managers. He had to have a strategy department of where you're going to place all these different stores. And then he had to start thinking that after the 7 years of plenty, we're going to need a sales team. We don't have anybody that sells grain the way it's going to be sold 7 years from now. And then at the end of the day, they had to have some kind of analytics. I'm a data guy, so sorry. They had to have something to say, okay, do we have enough grain that's going to keep us for the next 7 years? And then once the famine started, which is the last 7 years, because this whole period was 14 years, He then had the sales team to kind of kick in, right? To start selling the grain, not just to Egypt, but across, a wide range, because even his parents didn't have food where they are. And then he had to create some kind of way of banking all this money. And then not only banking it, but actually investing it, because now you have all this money that's coming into the coffers of Pharaoh, and he has to do something with it. And we got to a stage where people ran out of money, and they started giving up their houses and their land. So he then had to have property managers. And like any startup, he probably had to then have corporate responsibility. Then at some point, he had to have some accounting, and then land managers, because now you have all this land, all these houses that you now have to manage. And I only give this example to make you realize that sometimes when sudden change happens, you have to kind of be very agile to kind of think about how do you solution going forward. So in sudden change, or in anything really, the one thing you can truly control, right? There are many things we think we can control. We think we can control people. We think we can control the stock market. We think we can control how much money we get. But actually, no. The one thing you can truly control in any change or disruption is your attitude and your reaction. If you get fired, what's going to be your attitude? What's going to be your reaction? And like I gave an example, when my notice period was cut from 6 months to 2 months, I had a very bad reaction. I look back and think, I wish I handled that better. I had a very bad reaction, but, thank God that I'm in good rapport with the people. I mean, I didn't burn too many bridges, but, I was close to burning a few, but I had a good mentor. I had a good advisor who kind of kept me to say, hey, Shola, think about the future. Think about beyond today. Think about beyond right now. So the one thing you can truly control in any change or disruption is your attitude and your reaction. What is your attitude to the situation, and what is your reaction to it? And I love this slide because it kind of puts the onus back on us as individuals. We need to lead ourselves. What is your calling? What are you? What makes you you? What motivates you? What rewards do you expect? What is your purpose in life? Like, because when it's all said and done, particularly when sudden change happens, you have to be clear that you're clear about your purpose. And we'll talk about that a bit more when we talk about the end game mindset. And what defines you? If somebody, if I met a colleague of yours, a boss of yours, or a spouse of yours, how would they define you? How do you define yourself? And what rights do you have? And I say in Christ because, I was looking at this from a Christian perspective, but, what rights do you have in the workplace? Do you understand the company policies? What strengths and weaknesses, opportunities or threats do you see? And why are you doing what you're doing? Because it's very important to know your why. Because if you don't know your why, then it becomes very difficult when things become crazy for you to navigate and find your way forward. Here's a great quote, again, from Tim Groves, talking about winning. And he says, fear shows up on its own. Like, if you're in sudden change, fear just shows up. Like, what am I going to do now? It just shows up. It's not even invited. But doubt, you have to invite doubt. So when you go through sudden change, it will be a mistake for you to now invite doubt into the situation and say, oh, am I going to make it through? What's my future going to be like? That's more doubt. Fear heightens your awareness. Fear makes you realize, okay, things have changed. Now I got double promotion. Now I'm in charge of this new project that I know nothing about. And fear makes you aware about what you don't know and makes you alert to say, okay, I've got to learn, study, and be better. Doubt is the opposite. Doubt slows you down. Doubt says to you, oh my gosh, they cut your notice by 4 months. What are you going to do now? And then it paralyzes you. It paralyzes your thinking. You can't really think beyond that moment anymore. And before you know it, a month's gone, 2 months have gone. And a lot of people in the middle of sudden change have lost their way because they get paralyzed by doubt. I'm just throwing that out there as a kind of a concept to think about. I mean, I cannot recommend this book enough. And it's a hard book to read because it is, like it says, the unforgiving race to greatness, winning. and winning is reckless in the way it treats people. So the 7 key elements to thriving in sudden change, and I'll tell you this, these you can't find in a book anywhere else because they're things that I've experienced myself and I'm going to share with you today. And the 7 things are this: knowing what you have in your hand. I'm going to talk about each of them in a second. Leverage the power of your network. Understand, have an end game mindset. Know what time it is on your career timeline. Resilience and grit. Here's one that I kind of had to think twice about and consult a friend of mine on this. Because I only had resilience before, and then they made me realize like you need both. You need grit and you need resilience, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then what do you see ahead of you? And sometimes it might not be you seeing it. Maybe people need to see on your behalf. And then finally, what's the impact of mentors and coaches? And we kind of end that with that there. So let's start with the first thing, knowing what you have in your hand. And each of us, you know, when we come to a point of sudden change, at that point of sudden change, there are certain things you have in your hand. And being aware of those things is critical. So number one, your education. No matter how much, how little or how much you have of it, it is yours. Nobody can take that away from you. And when I mean education, I do mean broader education rather than just going to university or going to secondary school. Like how you educate yourself, what you read, how you absorb knowledge. And I could change your education to the knowledge that you have. The second thing is your experience. No matter what time it is on your career journey, or no matter where you are and sudden change happens to you, there's a certain amount of experience that you have earned and gained through your working life or through life itself. And so at the point of sudden change, you need to evaluate and ask yourself the question, what do I have in terms of my education? What do I have in terms of my experience? And then the next thing is, what skill sets do you have? And actually at the point of sudden change, you also have to think about what future skill sets you need to have. I was talking to a company the other day and they were like, oh, we're looking at APIs. And I was like, have you got a ChatGPT API? Because we know that the future skill sets that you're going to need is going to relate with ChatGPT if you're in some kind of software development SaaS solution. And so the first principle I would say that you need to master when you are in sudden change is knowing what's in your hand. And that's different for everybody. But you taking stock, taking an evaluation of where you are, and I can relate this back to, you know, when my spouse moved to the UK, I knew I had a civil engineering degree. I knew I had very little experience working, but I knew that I had a skill of, I was a quick, fast learner. And so I went into the security business and I learned very quickly, got promoted very quickly, and spent, you know, almost 2 years in that space. And actually it was while I was doing a job as a security guard that I found a job that led me to get a graduate placement at the University of Manchester. And so the key point is not panicking. Maybe I should even have another thing on this page that says, don't panic, but take an evaluation of what you have in your hand. Because what you have in your hand is very, very valuable, and it becomes one of the critical tools that you need when you're trying to manage sudden change. And maybe I will finish on that particular topic by saying this: believe in yourself and your abilities. You have come this far because of your skills and talents, no matter what anybody says to you. No matter if somebody says to you, oh, your job is over because we don't think we need you anymore. It doesn't matter. You got that far because you believed in yourself. You have some abilities, and you've come this far because of your skills and your talents. And therefore, you know you can go further because of your skills and your talents. So next, number 2, leverage the power of your network. And your network, I say this, is your net worth. And a lot of people might not believe that, but I do believe that the power of your network is very, very powerful. When I left a consulting firm and I had all this time on my hand, it was somebody in my network that rang me and said, hey, would you like to come and work for Deliveroo? And that's how I got into Deliveroo. And so I'm just going to spend a few minutes about talking about your network. So the first thing to do is understand your network. Where is your network? And a lot of people, we have lots of platforms. We have lots of social media platforms. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, we have LinkedIn. And I tend to, and like, I'm not totally, like, I'm not a rule of law on it, but I'm saying I tend to think that when it comes to networking for your career, LinkedIn is the place to go. So building your network in LinkedIn starts with you understanding who's in your network. Who have you added? Who is adding you? Understand it. Do you have peers there? Do you have people above you there? Do you have people that you might want to be a mentor? How are you approaching people to understand and build your network? Once you understand your network, you then need to connect your network with your network. I even did it today where somebody needed some information, somebody in my network, I connected them both together, and then I dropped out of the conversation. And so connecting your network makes your network stronger. Then learn from your network. So a lot of people have, I mean, I have about 15,000 followers on LinkedIn and all people in my network. And I tend to make sure that every year, 80% of those people, we're gonna connect. I'm gonna learn from them. I'm gonna like their post. I'm gonna read their post. That's part of giving to your network. Like, I'm gonna like their post. I'm going to, connect with them. I'm gonna repost things that are important to me and maybe to them. And then I'm gonna connect others to them so that we keep this circle of building a network. And I always say, when you're in sudden change, the power of your network is gonna be vital, literally vital. And I can't count how many times in my career where my network has come to my rescue, particularly when I'm transitioning through roles. So leveraging the power of your network. And then some people ask me, like, when they saw this slide, they were like, what if I don't have a network? Then start building it today. Start building it today, reach out to people, check people online. And the good news is that with LinkedIn now, you can actually follow somebody without actually connecting to them. So maybe start by following, because if you follow them, things in their feed will come up, and then maybe one day you can connect with them. So yeah, leverage the power of your network, because when you go through sudden change, you're definitely going to need that. I need to speed up a bit. So another thing to think about is to have an end game mindset. Like, where do you want to end? Like, where is this all going to end? What's your 1-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? And maybe asking you the question, what's your end game plan? When do you want to retire? Do you want to work for a bit in corporate, then go and work for a startup? Like, this is all part of you knowing where you want to go. So what's your end game plan? And if you don't have an end game plan, or you don't have a 1-year plan, maybe a way to start is reading a book by Simon Sinek. Start with why. What is your why? What defines you? Then maybe get a mentor. Or maybe just start by mind mapping your life story, your life journey, because it would lead you to kind of understand what potentially your end game could be. So as part of managing sudden change is know what the end game is, which leads to the next one, which is, what time is it? What time is it on your career journey? Are you just starting in your career? Like, when my spouse moved, I was just starting, I just graduated, I worked for the government for 1 year. So I was way at the beginning of my career. And so I could take some risks at that time. I could go and learn a new profession. I could learn how to program, which is what I eventually did, because that was the start of my career. Are you at the middle of your career? Are you kind of like middle management and you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to learn something new, or I feel like I don't want to learn something new, I just want to stay in this space? Or are you at, like, close to your last rodeo? And depending on where you are on your timeline, it will affect how you react to sudden change. Is this an opportunity for you to be self-employed? Is this an opportunity for you to have a side hustle that might become your main hustle? Is it time for you to pivot to a more impactful career? A lot of people I talk to who are kind of in their 40s, 50s, they start talking to me about, legacy and impact. And, I don't just want to work for money. I want to work for something that adds value and has an impact and leaves a legacy. And you think about someone like Bill Gates, who kind of built Microsoft and decided that now he wanted to do more impact projects with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So you can see that someone like that, who's kind of CEO of his own company, decides to pivot because he wants to do something different. And so knowing where you are on your career timeline is very, very important. And that all goes back to your end game plan. Like, if you know you want to retire at 60 and you're 40, then you've got 20 years left. But if you're saying, like, you want to keep working, like Warren Buffett is 90 something and is still working, then you have a different end game. You have a different plan, a different approach. And if you get made redundant at 65, it's not the end because you know you've got another 25 years to go. And I learned this principle a lot when I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I missed being manager one year. And I went to my mentor and I was like really mad that why did I miss the opportunity? And she said, what does it matter? If the end game is that we're going to make you a partner, why does it matter which year you become a director? Because the end game is we would like you to be a partner here. And it changed my perspective because I realized in my career timeline, my end game was clear, my timeline was clear, and so I didn't have to get frustrated at this point because I wasn't getting what I wanted. So 3 things to consider. Where are you in your career journey? Are you at a point where you want to be laying a lot more, focusing a lot more on impact? Or are you now at the stage where you want to start thinking about your legacy? Or are you just clearly just trying to add value, adding value, adding value, adding value? Because it will help you to understand what do you do next in the midst of a sudden career change. And remember, we talked about many different things, whether it's COVID, whether you got married, whether you got promoted, all these things come into play because you have to look at it more holistically rather than just as an individual, isolated situation. Resilience and grit. What is resilience? Resilience is the ability to come back from a setback, adapt to change, cope with stress and challenge, maintain a positive outlook when everything looks like it's falling apart. Resilience is not falling apart when things get bad, even though you have every reason to fall apart. Resilience is what says to you, come on, Shola, you can do this. Like, you've been knocked back, you missed that promotion, but keep pushing forward. You thought you had a job for life, but actually you don't. And so what are you going to do now? And it's kind of resilience is that thing that says to you, what are you going to do now? There's been a setback. What are you going to do now? And I don't know whether there's anybody on this call today that you feel that way. Like you feel like, I just need a bit more resilience to kind of push through despite adversity, despite the challenge, despite my manager, despite my colleagues, despite the economic situation, despite everything that's going on. I need to push through to the other side. And the twin of resilience is grit, right? Game plan and just face obstacles and setbacks and just say, we're going to the other side. Like you just have this drive to achieve success, independent of beyond your own talent and intelligence. You're going to use and hoover up every help you can get because you didn't come here to play, you came here to get to the other side. And so when you combine grit and resilience, you get this powerful dynamic of success because you take resilience, which is about bouncing back from adversity, and you combine it with focus and commitment and ability to overcome obstacles. And when you are in a sudden change and you have these 2 components in your back pocket, they become a key arsenal to overcome any discouragement that comes from sudden change or any challenge that comes from sudden change. Because remember, every sudden change is not necessarily negative. It could be a positive change where you find yourself out of your depth. My boss left and I was now in charge of a multi-million project that I had no idea about. But because sometimes you don't see everything by yourself. And I talked about having an end game mindset. Joseph knew the end game. He knew that sometime along this journey, my brothers are going to bow down to me. And so he kept his focus. So even when he was in prison and he had an opportunity to make a case for himself, he told the butler, when you get out, remember me. And actually, the reason why 2 years later he was brought before Pharaoh was because the butler remembered him. And he left that message in the butler's mind because technically Joseph was in prison for life. And he left it in the butler's mind because he knew he wasn't going to stay here. So your end game informs your next step. So depending on where you are on your career timeline, your next step is the most important step. And mentors can help you see what's next for you because mentors have been there and they can show you how to get there. That leads to impacts of mentors and coaches. And I wish I could spend hours on this slide, really, but we don't have that hours. So I kind of say a good mentor sees greatness in you, finds ways to bring it out of you, and pushes you forward. That's the power of a mentor. A mentor takes you on the road they have been, shows you shortcuts to the destination. They've been through sudden change. They understand it. They can coach you. They can teach you. They can show you. John Crosby says a mentor is a brain to pick, an ear to listen, and a push in the right direction. Whereas a coach is more like that person that gives you methods and methodologies, identifies gaps in your skills, and kind of points you in the right direction and says, hey, yeah, you've had this pushback, but you've got it in you to press through this. Helps you build your confidence and your self-esteem and cheers you on to be a better version of yourself. They use their knowledge and expertise to help you as an individual or teams to achieve their ultimate goal. So you need mentors and you need coaches, definitely. It's a must particularly when you're in a sudden change and your career is taking a different trajectory. I wouldn't have survived taking on that new role after my boss left if I didn't have great mentors and an amazing coach who kind of coached me on the whole HR life cycle. And I actually owe my career to that one pivot. You know, my career in HR really came from that one pivot. 20 years later, I go back to that moment and say, that was a defining moment. And it was mentors and coaches that really got me through it. So remember this, managing sudden change can be a challenging experience, whether it's a negative change or a positive change. But with time, patience, grit and resilience, courage, you can successfully navigate through it. And I hope that with what I've shared with you today, a little bit of what I've shared kind of gives you that hope and anticipation that you can make it through. So I never do a presentation generally when I'm in the marketplace without recommending books. I've already talked about Winning. I read Winning every single year. I start my January reading Winning. I've done that for the last 2 years, and I'm looking forward to doing it again in January. The next book I want to recommend is small bite-sized chunks that you can just read. Like they have an amazing, the best thing I've read on multitasking was in this book. It changed my perspective for life. And then the story of Mento Naiti in South Africa, betting on a darkie. This guy's story is just phenomenal. How he pivoted, managed sudden change in his life. All of a sudden, he's the CEO of like one of the biggest companies in South Africa, and then he pivots out of that. It's just a great story, and if you like reading, it's a great book to get. And don't worry, I don't get any commission for any of these book recommendations. And then maybe finally, in terms of books, I wrote a book almost a year and a half ago called The Art of Managing Up for Career Progression. And we'll put this link. So Kumbi, I hope you can put this link in the chat so we can pick it up so you can get the book there. The plan also is after this, and I know I've kind of tried to race through the content in about 45 minutes. The plan after this is that we're planning to do like a mentoring circle or like a masterclass on this where we do a bit more deep. You prepare yourself for what comes next for you. We have a guest that will be part of this thing. You get an email after this. So everybody who registered will get an email after this to tell them more about that and the form to register for it. So I've got through my content very quickly, I know, but I'm just going to stop sharing, and then we're going to open up for questions or comments or thoughts. So you can either unmute yourself, ask your question. Oh, sorry, some people said they were struggling to hear. Oh, sorry, I'm just catching up with the chats. All right, so any questions or thoughts? I'm sorry if there was any cuts in the sound. It could be maybe due to our blessed Vodafone in Germany. So any questions, any thoughts, any comments? Please feel free to unmute yourself or drop a question in the chat. So I'm just going to quickly go through the chat whether I missed any. Thank you, Ruth. Okay, thanks, Eduard. Okay, so let's see, there's some questions coming in. Okay, you made me think of a quote I read today. Courage is the most important of the virtues because without it, no other virtue can be practiced consistently. That's Maya. Yeah, amazing. I totally agree with that, Taco. Okay, one question. I'm just curious that what made you do this? Oh, what made me do this? So that's a good question. I think it started more from what's happening in the marketplace. So there are a lot of people out there who are going through change, and it's sudden, right? You know, Microsoft announced almost 10,000, and Facebook, and it's kind of global. And I think it was from that it started. But then also it made me just sit down and think about, hey, in my life, what are the things that have really impacted me? And basically, I pulled this all together. And like I said, the journey really is to write a book about this. So taking the content from today and making it into a book in a couple of months' time. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay, more. Okay, so here's a question here. If you have not been clear on your career path and suddenly you are unsettled and want to move ahead, what do you do? So that's not particularly a sudden change, but the principles of sudden change can help, right? Because again, you start with, I don't want to kind of break it down too much, but let's start with this, Azuka. You start with the idea of what do you have in your hand? What experience do you have? What future skills do you need for the pivot or the change that you want to make? And again, I think it's very important to ask yourself, what unsettles you? Is it the market? Is it your company? So understanding all those factors do really help you to navigate to what comes next. And I think that's really powerful, where a mentor or a coach can really, really help you. Because sometimes when you kind of get a bit frazzled, you need somebody, an external voice, to kind of help you think it through. I got a call from a CEO this afternoon, and he said to me, I just need to brain dump with you. So can we get together? And we're just going to have a brain dump and just talk about what's on his mind, what's happening in the marketplace, how is his revenue going? And through that, we would easily work out what's next for him. So I hope that helps in answering that question. Okay. All right. I'll just wait for one more minute. Okay. How do we get a mentor? Ola, great question. How do you get a mentor? Simon Sinek has a great clip. You can just Google it on YouTube, called How to Find a Mentor. I think it's like a 5-minute clip where he talks about the fact that a lot of people want to get a mentor, but they don't want to know the person who is mentoring them. And he basically said that you don't walk up to somebody on the street and say, be my friend, right? You get to know people, you get to spend time with them. So I think, first of all, you kind of have to think about, where are you going? What do you want to do? That's the starting point for me. Where are you going? What do you want to do? That's number one. Once you understand that, then you then go and look out for people who are at the place where you're aiming for. right? So if you, let's say let's just use one very easy example. If you're a software developer and you want to become more like a product manager, then you look for somebody who's kind of done that change, because a mentor then kind of guides you. And that's the difference between a coach and a mentor. A coach doesn't really have to have been on your journey, whereas a mentor has been on your journey, knows how to get there, and can show you shortcuts. A coach kind of helps you to establish yourself. All right. Hope that's answered the question. Ola. There's another question here. That was a great talk. Thank you. I have worked my way up to a specific space, specific role in my space. Now I have it. It made me think about the career timeline you talked about. So I'm just reading the question. Next would be a CEO in a startup, but I really don't want to do that role. How can I sort through what I do next? Is it time for me to think about the impact, legacy, and value? I think that's a great question, and I know who asked the question. So I think really, and I think it's an age thing for me, but for other people, it's not, right? For me, it's an age thing that I realized a lot of people, my friends, were getting to 50 and they started asking this question around legacy, impact, and value. And I think what you really need to do is to say to yourself, I think you have to answer the question, where are you in your career timeline? Like, I know you say you want to be a CEO, but that's not what you really want to do. But where are you? Like, where are you financially? Where are you from a family point of view? Have you done everything you wanted to do? Is it time for you to pivot? And I think you're right. It is the time to say, how much impact am I having? How much impact would I have had if I was a CEO? How do I go and do something different to make that same impact? What legacy do I want to leave behind? And it might not be a CEO, it might be a co-CEO. It might be that you stay doing what you're doing, but then you increase your side hustle for things that you're really passionate about. Or maybe the last thing is like, how do you want to keep adding value, right? So let me go to the next question. Okay. And yes, Kumbi, if you just keep an eye out on the chat, if I missed a question, but I'm just going to take the next one. What tips do you have for older employees to change career? Oh, for people who are, yeah. I think, so I think there's a combination of things here, right? And that's why I think one of the most important things, like I don't mentor people that don't have a 1 year or 5 year plan. I just tell you, we need to work on a 1 year and 5 year plan. And actually you need an end game plan. And so if you're an older employee and you want to change career, the question is, what's your end game? And why do you want to change, right? Because everybody kind of feels this need to change because the world is changing around us. Like I say this and people don't like it. The reality is that actually in the world today, as much as some people today are on the cutting edge of using ChatGPT, there are still organizations on this planet that still send fax. That's just the reality. So I think the question is, why do you want to change? What do you want to change to? And how does that impact your end game? So that's why it's important to have an end game, because once you have an end game in mind, how you then navigate the breadcrumbs in front of you becomes very vital. All right. Okay. Thank you. I'm seeing a few thanks. All right. So Kumbi, can you just make sure I have not missed any questions? And
I think you've covered them all, the ones
okay.
that I've seen, yes.
All right. So I'm happy to kind of wrap this up now, unless there's anybody with a burning last question. Going on. I wish I could ask you questions. Okay, here we go. The chat. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Speaking of the end game plans. Okay, so the question from Nana. How do you navigate an end game plan when you know and admit that a barrier is in place that is harder to reach? Okay, so there again is a very, very good point where you have to say, how did I define my end game, right? So let's say, I'm just gonna make it up because Nana, I kind of have an idea. Let's say, Nana, your end game is that you want to be a CEO of a tech company. Or I might it just occurred to me that I might know the question you're asking, but or there are barriers in one thing you want to do. Then the question is, you need to find mentors, coaches, advisors that can tell you how to navigate around the barriers you see, because I generally believe that generally there's nothing new under the sun. There might be a new variation of it. And so if there's a barrier in your way, there must be somebody who's overcome that barrier. And that's where the power of networks come into play. And so you might just need to reach out to your network and ask the question and say, hey guys, I'm thinking of doing this. What are your thoughts on what I should do? Right? So I think that could be a good thing to think about when you see a barrier, is to kind of think about, okay, how do I break down this barrier? Because every barrier, in my view, is there to be broken. And even though it might be challenging, and even though you might be the first, you know, you just have to push through it. The guy who ran the first mile, the 4-minute mile or whatever it is, he had to push through barriers to get to it. And I think sudden change or opportunities come our way to really push through barriers. Ruth said I could ask you questions. Okay, so Gbenga is asking a question, and I'll come back to Ruth's question. And I think I will definitely end this session with a question to everybody. What advice will you give a 35-year-old, Shala, who is trying to navigate workspace to grow? What advice would I give a 35-year-old? I think the first advice I would give is age is just a number. That's my first advice. Okay. And I say that because I remember when I joined Deliveroo, I was in my late 40s, and everybody in my team was under 28 years old. I tell the story in my book. Under 28 years old. Literally, the youngest person on my team was 22. At the time, my son was about 19. And so I'm leading a team of people who are younger than me, more brilliant than me, more exciting than me. But I would say it was one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life, because I had people who had energy, who had passion. We just delivered, because these guys had energy, and all they needed was direction. And so I would say, I think the first thing is that don't see age as a barrier, because the world, you know, people are going to keep working, right? They're pushing out the retirement age. And actually the younger generation don't really want to work. So there's still going to be room for 35-year-olds to be part of the end game, right? And so I think it's more about finding where you fit, finding where you are on your timeline, and slotting yourself into it and enjoying the ride, is what I would say. Okay. Over the years in your career, what could you, sorry. So I'm just kind of getting up with the chat. So that was 35. Thank you, Anita, for your kind comments. Over the years in your career, what could you have done better? Oh, there's so many things I could have done better, but I don't have many regrets. There's so many things I could have done better, but I don't have many regrets. I think there's sometimes I could have pivoted quicker. I made one big mistake when I moved from one company to another, where I just made a lateral move. And that was the last lateral move I moved, because I realized when you make a lateral move, you kind of lose out eventually. And I did. I lost 2 years because of it. There are not many things that I think, when I look back at my career, because I've had such a diverse career, that I think I would have done better. I do think, though, that I probably should have stepped into certain roles earlier. And I think I didn't, because I was afraid, and actually took my peers to kind of push me into those roles. And once I got into it, I kind of thrived. So maybe to answer your question, Gbenga, I would say there are certain things I could have done earlier that I delayed because of fear and doubts. And now I look back and I wish I had taken those steps earlier, because it could have accelerated me a little bit more. But I really sit here with not many regrets, really, and really enjoyed my ride, no matter how up and down it's kind of been. Taking away. Okay. So as we come to kind of like an end, I'm not going to drag this out. So we said we're going to go to like 8:15. So we're at 8:05 now. So fine. So the key thing is that you're going to get an email after this. We would really like to kind of improve these sessions. So please do give us feedback. There is a recording, but there's going to be a small charge for the recording because that's kind of the way we set this up. But you know, all the information will be in an email. So my last question to you, right? And feel free to just drop in the chat. We're going to pick up the chat. Okay. So there's a form for the feedback also being posted, but you'll also get in the email. So my last question to you, if you were running this session, right? Get ready. I want quick fingers. If you were running this session, what would have been something that I didn't say today that you would have wanted to have heard or said? I know you're going to do feedback, but this is more like quick fingers. Drop it in the chat. Here we go. And then that's the last thing we're going to do. Thank you for the kind feedback. But yeah, any quick thoughts? Like I said, it's quick buzzers. This is not something you have to think too much about. You might say, oh, I'll have given more examples, or I'll have given more tips, or just drop it in the chat. And then we're going to end with that. What would you have done differently? Oh, people are now shot shy. There we go. More time to explain with examples. Okay, good. More illustrations. Okay, thank you. Don't worry, Benga, that will be in the book. But thank you, that's good feedback. Okay. So Timmy Tokwe, I would encourage you to get my book on, what do you call it? Managing up for career progression. It kind of details my career. Okay, hold on a second. There was a comment about moms, women changing job, launching into self-employment. Yes, that's a big area, right? That's a big area around women and the changes that women have to go through. Yeah. Okay. That's so true. Yeah, that's true. So Yasmin, I don't know whether you were saying that something I would do better, but I think it's a great comment and people are already liking that comment that you put in there. One thing leads to another in life, especially with sudden changes. Sometimes in the moment you are unable to connect the dots, but in time it all comes together. That's a wonderful one. So Yasmin, can I ask your permission that I can quote that when I do the book? Can I quote that and I'll credit you with that quote? Can you tell me whether you agree with that? And then we'll end with that. Yes, you can quote it. Thank you. I'm going to quote it. Thank you, Yasmin. Amazing. That's a great way. I don't know whether everybody saw it. Like one thing leads to another in life, especially with sudden changes. And sometimes in the moment, you're unable to connect the dots, but in time, it all comes together. That's a wonderful way to end today. Let me just see. Bought the book Managing Up already. Great. Thanks, Bakari. All right. Thank you, Shola. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I mean, we couldn't have done this without you attending. So thank you for making the time to be here. Thank you for being online and thank you for engaging. You'll get an email for feedback, how to get the recording, and we'll keep you posted about the book as we work on it. I'm hoping that it will launch before the end of the year. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm just gonna just wait while people depart. So thank you for the thank yous. Bye.